First, let's start with this case.
For months, my soon-to-be sister-in-law never missed an opportunity to mock my wedding dress. Every time the topic came up, she made little digs about how simple and basic it was, acting as if I had settled for something unworthy of a real wedding. She bragged about how, when it was her turn, she would make sure to have a gown that was truly special. Something extravagant, designer, and unforgettable. I didn't take the comments personally at first. I had chosen a dress that I loved, one that fit my style and budget perfectly. It wasn't covered in diamonds, but it was elegant and timeless, exactly what I wanted. She, however, seemed to think that anything short of a designer label was laughable. She made jokes about it being affordable, scoffed at the lace detailing, and even rolled her eyes when I showed it to our family. I let it go. She was entitled to her opinion, and I had no reason to care what she thought. A few months later, she got engaged, and suddenly the energy shifted. She was now the bride, and her excitement was impossible to ignore. She immediately started talking about her dream dress, how she was going to get something custom-made, and how her wedding would be even more glamorous than mine. I wished her well and stayed out of it. Then she started shopping, and reality hit. She hadn't realized just how expensive wedding gowns could be. Every dress she wanted was far beyond her budget, and she had no savings to fall back on. Her dream of a designer dress started crumbling fast, and that's when she had a bright idea. She would take mine. She came to me acting like we were suddenly best friends. Gone was the mockery, the condescension. Now she was all smiles, talking about how much she loved my dress and how it would be perfect for her wedding. She expected me to just hand it over without question. I didn't even have to think about my answer. I reminded her of every time she had called it cheap, plain, and basic. If it wasn't good enough for her before, why was it good enough now? She immediately backpedaled, claiming that she had just been joking and that deep down she had always admired my dress. But I wasn't buying it. She threw a fit when I refused, calling me selfish and cruel. When I wouldn't budge, she ran to my fiancé, hoping to guilt-trip him into convincing me. She painted herself as a victim, crying about how I was being a mean girl and how I was ruining her wedding. She even tried to turn the family against me, playing the role of the poor bride who just needed a little help. Unfortunately for her, I had kept records. Every single text, every message where she had insulted my dress, I had them all. I calmly sent them to my fiancé and the family members she had complained to, letting them see the truth for themselves. There was no coming back from that. The final blow came when her own fiancé found out about the entire situation. He was embarrassed by her behavior and told her she needed to grow up. He wasn't interested in marrying someone who acted so entitled and petty. Now, she has no dress, no money, and a fiancé who is suddenly unsure if he even wants to go through with the wedding at all. Let's start judging. You're not in the wrong. She mocked your dress for months, acted like it wasn't good enough for a real bride, and then suddenly wanted it when she couldn't afford her own. The entitlement is insane. And then she had the nerve to play the victim when you refused. She got exactly what she deserved. The fact that her own fiancé is reconsidering the wedding says a lot. He probably saw a side of her he hadn't noticed before. You're not in the wrong. People like her love to look down on others until they need something. She thought she was better than you and your cheap dress, but the second reality hit, she suddenly expected you to be generous. If it wasn't good enough, then it's not good enough now. Her tantrum and attempt to turn the family against you just proves she's used to getting her way. Glad you had receipts. Nothing shuts down entitled behavior faster than cold, hard proof. You're not in the wrong. Weddings really bring out people's true colors. She went from insulting your dress to demanding it, and when that didn't work, she tried to manipulate everyone around her. The absolute gall. And now she's potentially losing her fiancé over it? Karma works fast. Maybe she should try selling her attitude to pay for a new dress. Next up, for a long time, I thought my relationship with my ex-girlfriend was solid. We had been together for a few years and I genuinely believed we were happy. I made plans for our future, thinking we were on the same page. I worked hard to build stability, always made sure she felt loved, and never once imagined she would betray me. But she did. Toward the end of our relationship, I started noticing little changes. She became distant, constantly on her phone, and found excuses to stay out late. She would roll her eyes if I asked how her day was, and became easily irritated over small things. I wanted to believe it was just a rough patch, something we could work through, so I ignored the warning signs. Then one day, out of nowhere, she sat me down and said we needed to talk. She told me she didn't think things were working anymore, that she needed space to find herself, that she wasn't happy. It was the kind of vague, rehearsed breakup speech that screams, "I already have someone else." She refused to answer when I asked if there was another guy, acting offended that I would even suggest such a thing. But I found out the truth soon enough. Less than a week later, she had already moved in with some guy from her work, the same guy she had been sneaking around with behind my back. I won't lie, it hurt. Finding out that the person you loved had replaced you before they even left is a pain I wouldn't wish on anyone. But I did what I had to do. I cut off all contact, focused on my own life, and moved forward. I had no reason to think I'd ever see her again. Then, almost exactly a year later, she showed up at my door. When I opened it, I barely recognized her. She looked exhausted, like life had been kicking her around. Her hair was unkempt, her eyes had dark circles underneath, and she was carrying 2 bags like she had just been thrown out of somewhere. She greeted me awkwardly, like we were old friends catching up. She stumbled through some small talk before getting to her real reason for being there. Things with her new guy hadn't worked out. He had kicked her out, and now she had nowhere to go. She didn't have family nearby, didn't have money for a hotel, and our mutual friends weren't offering any help. She looked at me, the man she had betrayed and discarded, and expected me to save her. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. The woman who had stabbed me in the back, humiliated me, and replaced me in an instant was now standing at my door, hoping I would take her in. Her justification? We have history. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the sheer audacity was ridiculous. Then I told her exactly what she needed to hear. I reminded her of how she had cheated, how she had left without a second thought, and how she had chosen that guy over me. And then I told her to go stay with him. She stood there, her face shifting between shock, anger, and desperation. She mumbled something about how I was being cruel and vindictive, like I owed her something. When I didn't budge, she knocked a few more times, trying to get me to reconsider. I didn't. Eventually she left. Now she's begging all our mutual friends for a place to stay, but none of them are taking her in. Turns out, she burned too many bridges, and now she's facing the consequences of her own choices. And I'm living my best life, free of her and the drama she brings. Let's start judging. You're not in the wrong. She threw away a stable, loving relationship for a temporary fling, and now she expects the person she betrayed to be her safety net? Absolutely not. She made her bed, and now she gets to lie in it. The fact that none of your mutual friends are taking her in says a lot. She's clearly been burning bridges left and right. This isn't just karma, it's justice. You're not in the wrong. She left you for someone she thought was better, and when he threw her out, she came crawling back. She didn't regret hurting you. She regretted running out of options. If her new guy had kept her around, she wouldn't have given you a second thought. You don't owe her anything. Good on you for shutting the door on that nonsense. You're not in the wrong. She expected you to be her backup plan. She chose to betray you, she chose to move in with the other guy, and she chose to cut you out of her life. And yet the moment she was homeless, she magically remembered we have history? That's not history, that's manipulation. Next up, when my mom passed away, it was devastating. I wasn't just grieving her loss. I also had to deal with sorting through her estate, handling legal matters, and making sure that her belongings were properly accounted for. It was overwhelming, but I tried to handle it as respectfully as possible. Enter my aunt. She wasn't particularly close to my mom when she was alive. They had a strained relationship, and my mom had always warned me that she had a tendency to take advantage of people. I had no reason to doubt her, but at the time, I was too consumed by grief to worry about my aunt's behavior. That was a mistake. One day, I went to check on my mom's house, only to find that some of her most expensive furniture was gone. I panicked, thinking someone had broken in. But after asking around, I found out that there had been no robbery, My aunt had taken it. She hadn't asked. She hadn't even mentioned it. She had just helped herself. When I confronted her, she acted like it was no big deal. She told me that she had taken it because she needed it more than I did, and that I already had furniture in my own home. She actually had the nerve to act like she was doing me a favor by taking it off my hands. I told her to return it immediately. She laughed and refused, saying that it was already in her house and looked great there. I was furious, but I decided to give her one last chance to do the right thing. I told her that if she didn't return my mom's furniture, I would take legal action. She rolled her eyes and said, "Go ahead." So I did. I gathered every piece of proof I had: receipts, old photos of my mom's home, documentation proving ownership. I filed a claim in court, and when the date arrived, my aunt was still acting like she had done nothing wrong. She tried to argue that since the furniture had been in my mom's house and not mine, it didn't automatically belong to me. The judge shut that down immediately. Then she tried to claim that I was being selfish by going after her for a few pieces of furniture. That didn't work either, because I had already provided proof that she hadn't just taken 1 or 2 items. She had cleared out entire rooms. When the judge ruled in my favor and ordered her to return everything, she turned pale. But the real kicker? She had already sold some of it. Because she couldn't return everything she had stolen, she was forced to pay me the full value. She tried to get sympathy from the rest of the family, playing the victim and acting like I had financially ruined her over just some furniture. That worked for about 5 minutes, until everyone found out the truth. Now she's in debt, and the entire family knows she's a thief. Nobody trusts her anymore, and she's been completely ostracized at family gatherings. And I got my mother's furniture back and made sure she faced the consequences of her greed. Let's start judging. You're not in the wrong. She didn't just take a few things. She went on a full-blown shopping spree in your mom's house without asking. Then she had the audacity to sell what wasn't even hers and act like you were the bad guy for holding her accountable. She deserves every bit of embarrassment and financial loss she's dealing with now. You're not in the wrong. It's funny how thieves only care about consequences when they get caught. She didn't feel bad when she was stealing from you, but the second she had to pay up, suddenly she's the victim? Nope. Actions have consequences, and she's learning that the hard way. You're not in the wrong. Your aunt was basically a looter. She saw an opportunity, helped herself to your mom's belongings, and expected you to just accept it. The fact that she sold some of it makes it even worse. She wasn't just taking things she needed, she was profiting off of your loss. Disgusting. Next up, for years, I thought my best friend and I were inseparable. We had been through everything together. School, breakups, late-night talks about our dreams, and the struggles of entering adulthood. I genuinely believed that no matter what, we would always have each other's backs. Then she met her new, richer friends. At first, I was happy for her. She had started hanging out with a crowd that could afford expensive vacations, designer clothes, and 5-star restaurant dinners every weekend. I figured it was just a phase, that she'd still make time for me. But as the months passed, I noticed our conversations getting shorter, her responses becoming more delayed, and her invitations to hang out disappearing completely. The real kicker? She didn't just drift away, she started mocking me. She suddenly acted like my normal life was beneath her. I had a stable job, paid my bills, and lived within my means. Meanwhile, she was living off her new friend's generosity, pretending she was part of their elite world. Whenever we did talk, she'd make snide comments. She'd laugh about how boring my life was, how I was wasting my youth by working instead of experiencing life. She made it clear that she thought I was nothing compared to her new friends. One day, she stopped responding altogether. No explanation, no falling out, just ghosted me completely. I was hurt, but I moved on. Then, a year later, she came crawling back. Apparently, her rich friends had cut her off. She had been mooching off them for too long, and they got tired of it. Without their money, their fancy parties, and their endless spending sprees, she was suddenly nothing to them. Now she was broke, struggling to pay rent, and in desperate need of help. And who did she run to? Me. She showed up at my door, acting like we were still best friends. No apology, no acknowledgement of how she had treated me. Just fake smiles, and a desperate attempt to pretend nothing had happened. She told me she needed a place to stay, just for a while, until she could get back on her feet. I just stood there for a moment, staring at the same person who had once mocked me for being too average. Then I told her exactly what she needed to hear. I said, "Sorry, I don't have room for fake friends." Her face dropped. She tried to argue, said that I was being cruel, that she had nowhere else to go. But I wasn't about to be her backup plan just because her first choice had thrown her out. Now, she's sleeping on her cousin's couch and constantly complaining about how hard life is. I don't feel bad. She made her choice, and now she has to live with it. Let's start judging. You're not in the wrong. She dropped you like a bad habit the second she found people she thought were better. She had no problem mocking you for having a stable life while she lived off others. Now that she has nothing, she suddenly remembers how good of a friend you were? Nope. She made her choice. You're not in the wrong. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a small falling out. She actively looked down on you for an entire year. The second her rich friends dumped her, she came running back without an apology. She wasn't sorry, she was just desperate. You're not in the wrong. This is classic burning bridges and regretting it later. She saw you as a backup option, not a real friend. You did the right thing by refusing to be her safety net. Let her learn the hard way that real friendships aren't disposable.